The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. Carl Jung. The curse of early potential. You were the smart kid, the gifted one, the one teachers praised, parents paraded, and relatives compared everyone else to. You didn't just answer the question, you finished the test early. You weren't taught so much as you absorbed, and from the outside, you looked destined, special. But something happened. Now you wake up and feel behind, disconnected, aimless. You scroll past success stories with a strange ache in your chest. Not jealousy, not bitterness, but confusion. What happened to the kid who had so much promise? You see, no one tells the gifted child that being early isn't a guarantee. It's a warning. It means your peak came before your foundation. And when the world stopped handing you praise for being impressive, you were left with no map, just questions you were never trained to answer. You were praised for your intelligence, not for your courage to fail. And so, failure became unbearable. You learned how to be right, but not how to be real, because that's the hidden curse of early potential. The pedestal becomes a prison. You were loved for what you could do, not for who you were becoming. So you became a performer, a chameleon. You said what made adults proud. You avoided what made you look average. You became addicted to gold stars. And slowly, silently, you lost the one thing every smart kid needs to stay smart: curiosity. Not the kind that helps you memorize trivia or win spelling bees. The kind that helps you wonder, who am I if I stop performing? What do I want? Not just what impresses people. But you never had time to ask those questions. You were too busy being impressive. Now you feel stuck. Not because you're lazy, not because you're weak, but because you're finally facing a world where intelligence alone isn't enough, where no one cares about your GPA, and no one claps when you speak. And you're terrified because you were never trained for this part. You were trained to climb ladders, but no one taught you how to build one. And here's the secret. Many of the late bloomers you envy weren't slower than you. They were just less caged. They failed more, tried more, embarrassed themselves more. And in doing so, they built something you never had to: resilience, adaptability, self-trust. So if you feel lost now, it's not because you peaked early. It's because your identity was tied to being early. And life no longer rewards speed, it rewards depth. The good news, you can still become that person. But it won't come from praise or potential. It will come from pain, from letting go of the image, and finally meeting the soul underneath. The high cost of perfection. Perfection looks beautiful on the outside, clean, polished, admired. But beneath it, it's often fear, insecurity, exhaustion. You were the smart kid, so perfection wasn't just expected of you. It became your identity. Your homework had to be flawless, your speech articulate, your emotions hidden. You weren't just taught to succeed, you were taught to avoid failure at all costs. So you became careful, calculated, impressive, but hesitant. And now that fear has grown roots. You overthink decisions. You procrastinate not because you don't care, but because the idea of doing something imperfectly terrifies you. You edit your words mid-sentence. You rehearse conversations in your head. You avoid taking risks because you secretly believe your worth was only ever tied to being extraordinary. Perfection, when practiced long enough, stops being a habit. It becomes a cage. It isolates you. Because being perfect means never being vulnerable, never asking for help, never showing weakness. And slowly, you stop connecting with people, not because you don't want to, but because you don't know how to show up without the mask. And here's the cruel irony. The more perfect you try to be, the more disconnected you feel. Because deep down, everyone craves real, and real is messy. Real is unfinished, real is uncertain. But perfection doesn't allow for that. It only rewards the appearance of control. So what do? You start by noticing how many things you avoid simply because you fear they won't be impressive. You notice how often you say, "I'm fine," when you're not. You pay attention to the subtle panic that creeps in when you try something new and it doesn't come naturally, and then you do it anyway. You embrace being seen as average. You risk being misunderstood. You stop aiming to be flawless and start aiming to be free. Because the most powerful people in the world aren't perfect. They're courageous. They know that perfection is a performance, and they're done performing. when praise becomes a prison. If you live for people's acceptance, you will die from their rejection. Lecrae. Praise is a beautiful drug, and like any drug, it changes you. When you were a smart kid, praise wasn't just encouragement, it was identity. It became the mirror in which you saw your worth. Every compliment was a confirmation you were enough. Every proud smile was a reward. Keep performing. And you did. Again and again, until the performance became who you were. But here's the thing. When your worth is built on praise, your life becomes a stage. And that stage, it has rules. Rule 1, only show what you're good at. Rule 2, hide your confusion. Rule 3, never fail in public. So you stopped experimenting. You stopped taking risks. You only pursued what came easy. And slowly, silently, you stopped growing. Not because you weren't capable, but because growth would mean being seen as less than perfect. That fear choked your curiosity. That fear turned your potential into a prison. And worse, praise is never permanent. As you got older, the applause faded. No one clapped when you cooked your own meals. No one gave you a trophy for setting boundaries. The spotlight moved on. And without it, you began to question yourself. Who am I if no one is watching? This is the collapse of the performance identity. It's the moment the smart kid realizes they've built their self-esteem on borrowed eyes. And without those eyes, they feel invisible. But here's the good news. You can leave the stage. You can choose to define yourself not by applause, but by alignment. Not by what impresses people, but by what fulfills you. That shift is terrifying, but it's the first step toward freedom. Because once you realize you don't need to be exceptional to be worthy, you finally give yourself permission to be real. And real is messy. Real fails. Real learns. Real is the only path to growth that lasts. The prison of praise doesn't have bars. It has beliefs. And beliefs can be broken. So ask yourself, what would you try if no one was watching? The answer to that question? That's where your freedom begins. The crisis of identity. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. When you were younger, being the smart one wasn't just a compliment, it was your role. A role assigned to you before you even understood what identity meant. It told you how to behave, what to value, and more dangerously, what to avoid. You avoided failure, avoided looking dumb, avoided anything that might threaten the label you were given. But labels are not identities. They're expectations, they're costumes. And when the real you starts to grow, the confused you, the curious you, the one who doesn't know what the hell he's doing, that label becomes a cage. Here's what no one tells you. Intelligence doesn't guarantee direction. Being smart doesn't mean you'll know who you are. In fact, it can get in the way. Because when you're rewarded for answers, you start to fear questions. When you're praised for achievement, you start to fear exploration. And so you perform, but you don't reflect. You adapt, but you don't align. And then one day, you look in the mirror and realize you've become a stranger to yourself. That's the crisis. The crisis of identity is not a sudden event. It's a slow erosion. It's the years of saying yes to paths that weren't yours. The jobs, the relationships, the degrees, the dreams that belong to someone else, your parents, your teachers, your culture. You inherited goals. You didn't choose them. And now, in adulthood, the illusion cracks. You have the resume, you have the recognition, but inside, you're hollow, drifting, number, because you never learned to hear your own voice, only the applause. But here's the truth. Identity isn't found. It's built, not by answers, but by questions. Who am I when I stop performing? What matters to me when no one's grading me? What do I love when I'm not trying to win? These are terrifying questions, but they're also liberating. Because the identity crisis isn't a death, it's a birth. It's the shedding of who you were told to be so you can become who you actually are. And yes, that process is messy. It's confusing. It might mean losing people, changing paths, starting over. But what you gain is priceless. Your own name. The return to wholeness. You must let go of the life you plan to find the life that is waiting for you. Joseph Campbell. This is the final chapter, and maybe the hardest to accept, because when you're the smart kid who grew up feeling lost, the temptation is to keep looking for the next achievement that will finally make you feel whole. The new job, the new project, the new goal. But what if the real answer isn't forward? What if it's inward? You spent your life being rewarded for answers, but now, wholeness demands something else. Presence, stillness. Not the rush to prove yourself, but the courage to face yourself. The truth is, most of your pain isn't from being lost. It's from resisting the fact that you are. You've made being on track the measure of your worth. But life isn't a curriculum. There's no syllabus for becoming yourself. And wholeness? It's not a destination. It's a reunion. It's reclaiming the parts of you that you abandoned to keep others comfortable. The artist, the dreamer, the question asker, the one who failed sometimes. And that was okay. To return to yourself, you'll have to grieve the life you were supposed to live. The perfect path, the one where you were always ahead, always impressive, always in control. That life never existed. It was a myth you were rewarded for chasing. But here's the miracle. When you stop trying to be extraordinary, you start to feel human again. You reconnect with joy, not just success, with meaning, not just metrics, with people, not just performance. And the most surprising part, you don't have to abandon your intelligence to heal. You just have to stop using it as a shield. Let it become a bridge to curiosity, to compassion, to creativity. The smart kid isn't gone. He's still in you. But now, he's allowed to be more than just smart. He's allowed to be confused, to wander, to feel. That's not failure. That's freedom. So if you feel lost right now, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're finally free enough to start looking for something real. Not the life you were expected to live, but the one that's quietly been calling your name all along.